Hello and welcome back. It's great to be back again and with one of my favorite people in the cannabis industry, Len May from Endocanna Health. Len and I met coming up on 2 years ago. It seems like an eternity at a conference, I believe in South Africa was the conference we met at. Yeah. And it turns out playing Jewish geography, we probably know a dozen people in common. And then you play Jewish cannabis geography and you know a couple dozen people in common. And I've always been fascinated by your company, Len, and I'm thrilled to come here and talk science and get really geeky and nerdy on the science of the stuff you do. Being in the pharma space, we were introduced to the concept of pharmacogenomics many years ago, and I was surprised to learn that in the traditional healthcare pharma space, you know, this is back 3-4 years ago when I first started learning about it, that this is a reimbursable event to go to the doctor and to get a swab. And some of these panels can cost as much as $2,000-$3,000 and insurance reimburses for it. Give us a sense of, you know, why that's the case and give us a sense of the space and you know, and we'll get into the cannabis side of it as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Dan. You're absolutely right. I think it's 2, maybe it's longer than 2 because last year was sort of a blur, so who knows how long that it is now. But yeah, I'm grateful to be on, and you're absolutely right. I mean, pharmacogenomics has been in place for many years, and it is a reimbursable event when a doctor orders it as a part of a diagnostic test. But what we're looking, or what the doctor looks for, is primarily drug-to-drug interaction. So looking at different prescription medications and how they can interact with other prescription medication you're consuming so to avoid an adverse event for somebody. There's a series of SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, that are being looked at. And there is a series of them called cytochrome P450. It's a family of markers that provides different enzymes from metabolizing different kind of things. Just an example, CYP2C9 produces an enzyme that metabolizes THC, for example. But you're looking at these series of different genes that work on metabolizing different drugs, and the interaction between those drugs can create adverse events. And some of them can be inducers, some of them can be inhibitors. So it depends on what the profile is and what the medication is. Doctors are always looking at pharmacogenomics to be able to guide them into an experience to help somebody have avoid an adverse effect from one of those medications.
And typically, the way we've done this in the past is trial and error, right? We just take a medicine, if I have an adverse event, I go to the doctor and say, I started flushing, right? Oh, try this. And so taking a swab can avoid that trial and error, right?
Yeah, it is true that it's trial and error, but I think, you know, I'm not gonna disparage pharma in any way, but I think that the way the Western medicine is set up is it's a for-profit entity. So if you're giving somebody a pill, and that pill has a side effect. And one of the things I was doing with my daughter, we were watching the Olympics. And I said to her, keep an eye out on the commercials, because I usually don't watch regular TV and commercials. For the Olympics, we see commercials. How many of these ads? They said, pay attention and listen to the quick, small print of it's going to cause X, Y, Z, and et cetera, right? So she's listening. She's like, oh my God. And this is to make you happy, but cause of death is a side effect? Yeah. But guess what? There's a pill for it, right? So for whatever it is that it has a side effect, there's another pill for it. And this is there is a business to this where there is a side effect and it's trial and error, but let's also give you other pills. But swabbing somebody can give you a more precise indication of how those things will interact, so you can have a much more personalized experience. The challenge with this whole thing is the feedback loop doesn't come back all the way. So if you speak to your healthcare professional, say, hey, you know, this medication is making me feel a little bit of this. If you had that communication, they'll modify your medication, but sometimes they may not look at the 3 different medications that are interacting together that create this experience. And some people say, you know what? It's okay. I can live with it. It's better than having my pain, so I have a headache once in a while, and then never even report that, you know, patient-reported outcome.
Right. I mean, you know, one of your taglines, and I love your taglines, is it's personal, and that's personalized medicine is really the talk of the future. It's a slogan of the future. Tell us what that means in cannabis and how you're taking pharmacogenomics in cannabis, and you know, what does that mean to medical professionals when I'm a patient and I go to a doctor and I ask about cannabis as an option? You know, tell us what that journey looks like.
Yeah, pharmacogenomics, just in general, looking at your genetics, pharmacokinetic, pharmacogenetic, all those different things create, that's your blueprint. So the idea was always this. And I had this experience, and I'll tell you sort of the first moment I had this experience that somebody actually went in my face and said, this is black and this is white. And I had a completely different feeling about it. I was in a dispensary with, when I used to have dispensaries, one of the coworkers there wanted to consume some cannabis. And he asked, what kind is that? And it was during the day and said, it's a sativa dominant hybrid. He goes, oh, no. That shit puts me to sleep. I'm like, what are you talking about? In the couch. I know that. That's what I was always taught. It's the other way around. I'm like, are you sure? He goes, yeah. So I'm like, I don't understand why you can have a completely different experience. And that sort of created this journey of trying to find out why people have this personalized experience. So the way we look at things is your genetics are your blueprint. So your DNA is your blueprint. It gives you sort of these are all the different predispositions that you may have. Now, it doesn't mean that something is going to express itself. That's those on-off switches which are epigenetic. But if you don't know this about yourself, you have no idea what you can do, what actually you can take to turn those on. And sometimes you're turning things on that you may not want to turn on, and vice versa. So the first thing you do is you look at your DNA and you look at all the different SNPs, as I explained before, single nucleotide polymorphisms that have an association with your endocannabinoid system. And that's a lot of them, because think about it. The endocannabinoid system is your primary modulator, right? It gets signals from your other systems, and it helps to release other endogenous endocannabinoids to get us back to homeostasis, balance. So it has to have a lot of tentacles. Like I have an octopus tattoo. That's my spirit animal. It has a lot of tentacles out everywhere trying to be able to modulate and regulate these different things. And when it gets those signals, then it releases those endogenous endocannabinoids. But the major thing that you're looking at is with these genetics are, you have certain genes that you can then consume a phytocannabinoid and actually have a potential for an adverse event, and some things that you want to actually have an optimal experience. So the first thing we look at is all the different SNPs, about 675,000 different biomarkers. So we look at those and we show you the genetic predisposition as it's associated with those conditions that people will consume cannabis for. So things like, anxiety, things like depressive states, feeling down, sleep is a big one, inflammation. And by the way, a lot of them are interconnected. And we also look at predispositions to adverse effects from certain cannabis. So let's say that somebody has a predisposition to stress reactivity. We know consuming cannabis and THC, vasodilator, your blood vessels are going to expand, your heart's going to beat faster. So maybe for you and me, okay, I'm used to it. I consume some cannabis. I know that I may have my heart will beat a little faster. It's fine. Somebody has a predisposition to stress reactivity, it can actually trigger that genetic expression. Now they're prone to anxiety or an anxiety attack. Okay, but it gets even better or worse, I guess worse for some people, because they can also be predisposed to psychosis or psychosis-like effects, and which is a disassociation. So I've had many people that have called and said, hey, I took an edible, which I can talk about. That depends on the stuff that we talked about, pharmacokinetic, pharmacogenomics. I took an edible and I had a panic attack. And from there, I had a psychotic episode and I was hospitalized. I'm like, wow, cannabis is safe, right? We always talk about it. Absolutely, it is. But you can have this expression with a lot of different things. Phytocannabinoids happens to be one of those things. But if you avoid that road that has a traffic jam, or looking at it as a GPS, you can have a much more optimal experience if you understand. So the first thing to do is do your DNA. The next thing is look at your genetic predispositions and find what are the things that are more optimal for me based on my genetics. The next thing is feed that back into the system. We use deep learning and AI to be able to find patterns. Okay, so based on these genotypes, this is working for these people, so we can make better suggestions and based on patient-reported outcomes and some other things that we look at. So now not only the individual is empowered to have that experience, but you can have a much more collaborative experience with your healthcare professional to work on preventative therapeutics, preventative wellness, than rather, oh, I got a pain in my elbow, let me give you a shot or a pill. But what's causing this pain? And those are the ways that we can be able to make predictive analysis going forward.
This is amazing. I'm blown away. When you start getting geeky and sciencey, I just love that stuff. But that's me. What does that mean to the average patient? I go to the doctor and I say, I've never used cannabis before, pain doctor or orthopedic doctor. I'm having surgery and I really want to avoid opioids because my family, ironically, has a history of addiction. I just know that. I didn't swab my cheek to know that, but I know that. My uncle, my father, whatever it might be. So I'm an average patient. I really want to avoid opioids. What does that mean? Walk me through the patient journey.
Well, so by the way, there are opioid dependence genes, and our report actually shows that. So you can see that just to be able to be sure if you have that predisposition. Same thing with alcohol dependence genes and psychostimulant, et cetera. So the journey, if it's in a doctor's office, so the doctor has the power to use the Endo DNA test as a potential diagnostic tool. It's not built for that, direct to consumer. It's for informational purposes only, but a doctor has a lot more visibility from that. So the way that it works is that you would swab the inside your mouth. We're HIPAA compliant. You would go in and you will register yourself. So you would be de-identified and anonymized. Then when you get your results back in a few weeks, the results will be in your portal, and you can go over all the different symptomatic conditions, as I mentioned before. From there, we also have a health profile. The health profile gives us a baseline. We also have the drug interaction piece, and all those pieces together build your personalized wellness plan. The personalized wellness plan, the doctor can look at it, or you can look at it with the doctor and say, okay, based on anxiety, my predisposition to anxiety, I also have some predisposition to sleep disturbances like bruxism. And from there, which is grinding your teeth, by the way, which I have. And from there, you look at, okay, I'm also taking this prescription medication, and I'm also taking these supplements, and both of them are slight inhibitors, or CBD or THC is a slight inhibitor of my prescription medication. So I may not want to consume my cannabinoid therapeutic with my prescription medication. I may want to stagger that. So how long do you stagger? You take your prescription medication, you wait. Well, it depends on what type of metabolizer you are. How quickly do you metabolize? And that's the other report is showing you that you are an intermediate metabolizer of THC, you're a rapid metabolizer, or you're a poor metabolizer. And that's when people get into having some experiences with edibles if they're a poor metabolizer. From there, it shows you what is your optimal ratio of cannabinoids and what is your primary and secondary terpene profile that aligns better with you. So an example would be, a real life example would be somebody has a predisposition to stress reactivity. So there's a gene called FAAH, F-A-A-H, fatty acid amide hydrolase. It actually produces an enzyme that breaks down THC. So in a stressful event, we have all these different chemicals that are shot into our bloodstream: adrenaline, dopamine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Now that your body realizes, okay, now I'm safe, it starts releasing these other chemicals. One of them happens to be anandamide to get us back to balance, which is the endogenous endocannabinoid, which THC mimics when it binds to the CB1 receptor. Now, FAAH produces an enzyme that breaks down anandamide, degrades it. So if we have a genotype that's too much FAAH, we produce less anandamide. And that stress starts to dissipate and stays longer. And over time, if you have these predispositions as well, it actually decreases your pH level, makes you more acidic. And then you have something called a cytokine, which is an overactive immune response, and you can start getting pain and inflammation in your joints. And if you have predispositions to gut health issues like IBD, it can start moving into your gut health and affect that. So if you know this about yourself and you're with a doctor, what should I consume? Well, I have an opioid predisposition. So, and we've had this with many pain specialists. They say, okay, let's try phytocannabinoids instead. Okay, great. What do I take? Well, I have no idea. And doctor's like, I have no idea. Just smoke a joint or get a tincture. Well, let's be more specific. Let's look at maybe high amounts of THC can actually trigger that stress reactivity, while small amounts of THC can actually merge or add to that depletion of your own natural anandamide that you have.
Yeah, so lubricated, like I like this. Yeah,
exactly. And then the terpene profiles are really important too. The essential oils in the plant. So things like limonene, etc., they can be an uplifting experience, where linalool can help lessen the anxiety that's provoked by THC. So having that precise sort of formulation and overview will help somebody have more optimal experience. And dosing is really important too. It's not only the profile, it's how much do you take. Well, we talked about, what is your metabolic function? And think about it this way. If somebody's a poor metabolizer and they go in and they say, I'm going to take an edible. So, and I had this happen so many times. Take an edible. If you're a poor metabolizer, it's going to take slower onset. Number one. Number two, the liver is going to convert it to 11-oxyhydroxide, which is 5 to 50 times more powerful. But for somebody that's predispositions to stress reactivity and PTSD and other genetic predispositions, it can be a very intense experience. And if that intense experience can trigger other predispositions like psychosis, as I mentioned, these are the things that you would use a DNA test to be able to guide you, like a GPS, to avoid those kind of experience, so you can have a much more optimal experience. And the health profile helps to get a baseline. And when you report back, now you're saying, okay, your pain is a 10, or I can't sleep, whatever it is, you report that back. And now you can have a patient-reported outcome that says, okay, well, this formulation is much more effective for these genotypes. And the more data we have, the more people we can help.
Yeah, so it's all about the data.
It's the data. The data is the long-term play, right? So you basically look at, it's two types of data. It's the data from the genotype. So we need data from as many people as possible. We can create genotype data. We validate that because it's very important. Everything that we do has to have a peer-reviewed reference. So we're not just pulling information. You have to have a PubMed-style peer-reviewed reference. And also, we're involved in research. So the more studies that everybody is doing, the more studies we pull in, we correlate those studies with patient-reported outcomes and other measurable things that we have in place. And that's where the data becomes of value. And I'm not even talking about financial value of the business. I'm talking about outcome value for physicians and other people that are
more accurate. I mean, just the more data, the more accurate. I mean,
exactly.
We see it in so many businesses now across so many industries, and this is just one where AI is going to give us data and information that we've never had access to before.
Exactly.
So you're an author. You wrote a book.
I did. Yes.
Tell me about it.
I didn't write the book. I want to be very explicit. So this is the book. It's called Making Cannabis Personal. This is the advanced copy. I don't know if your audience can see it, but the way the book is basically my story of how I got started, and then stories of individuals with their archetypes, like there's Grandma Mary and Jim the Veteran and other people that had experience with cannabis. Because one of the things that I found in my journey, people don't talk about their experience with cannabis if they had a negative experience. I had so many people, I'm like, hey, you want to consume? And they're like, oh, no. Cannabis makes me blank, whatever that is. Makes me anxious, makes me depressed, makes me sleepy, makes me... So let's talk about those things. And the reason is you're not alone. There's other people that have these things, but there's ways to be able to find something that's more effective for you. And so the book talks about that and just the journey throughout my whole life, from starting and getting into cannabis as a patient at a young age, overcoming my ADD, having my parents kick me out for that, coming back and consuming, formulations that I made for them, and then moving to LA and getting to the dispensary space. And as I mentioned, all the different things that we're doing. But the writing the book was really a challenging process because I'm not a writer. So Brian Kaufman, who's my co-author, he's the one that actually wrote everything. What I did was I recorded myself. So I would record all the stories, and it took me 2 years because the first version of the book was that all he did was transcribe my recordings. And when I read the book and then I gave it to some people, it really didn't have my voice. Like it was there, the information was there, but didn't have the flavor. It's very hard to explain. Like if you transcribe, it's missing that. And then so we decided to do it differently, where I would still record myself. We would meet twice a week through Zoom, and you go over the section that he wrote, and then I would start injecting my own sort of flavor into that. So that's kind of how the book came about.
Well, you have an amazing story. Your business is an amazing story. And, when we first met, one of the first questions I had was my son has, I refer to as the Jewish nerve bundle. So ADHD, he's on the spectrum, OCD, a little bit of everything sprinkled in. Mm-hmm. And we were trying CBD with him, and it was having a negative reaction. Mm-hmm. And there's a very specific genome type that actually has a negative reaction to SSRIs. And sure enough, as soon as he was on SSRIs, a very low dose, but the CBD was having a negative reaction. As soon as we took him off CBD, he started getting better. And as soon as we started changing the ratio to more THC, he started doing better. And then once we got the DNA test, it confirmed everything you had said. So could have shortcut a few painful months there where it just wasn't working for him.
Yeah,
actually having a negative effect. So,
yeah, and it happens a lot. And I appreciate you saying that. It does happen a lot in people, but it's not only about cannabis per se. One of the things that I think we're starting to see, and we're moving into that direction, is mental health has a tremendous impact on physical health. Obviously, most people know that, but the connections between mental health and physical health are prevalent. There's so much information, so many studies. So we are moving a lot more into mental health, and not only including phytocannabinoids, but also looking at other therapeutic methods, modalities like psychotropics. Even though we feel THC is a psychotropic, but we're looking at ketamine and psilocybin and LSD and MDMA and anything else that's going to be available and legal at a certain point. Those are all the things that we're looking at now.
Yeah, I'd say it is the hot space in the field. Everybody thought, when that first started popping up with the psychedelics. I hate that term because it's the wrong term, because it really is in many cases real medicine. But that's a hot space. The research is thin, but getting thicker, and obviously the service you provide to patients could be really helpful in navigating some of those new therapies that are popping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the space is hot, but also it's accelerated because I think the cannabis industry showed this industry of what the capabilities are, how quickly it can move, and ketamine is legal, so you don't have to work. And there are studies associated with real human studies, which we were lacking a lot in cannabis. Psilocybin is decriminalized in a lot of different places, and there's a lot of different, healthcare professionals administering those studies. The challenge with medical professionals in that is a lot of them don't know which psychotropic therapeutic is right for the individual based on their conditions. So they don't know. We don't know yet, but we know that some of these are more aligned with conditions than others. So if you have, if it's depression, we've seen studies on MDMA, we've seen on PTSD and ketamine. Yeah. But are there adverse effects associated with that therapeutic? Mm-hmm. Well, there are. Everything has. But is this person prone to those adverse effects more? And that's the thing that we can tell people. So when a physician is administering that therapy, they can understand what to do to mitigate the expression, so somebody won't have that negative experience. And even if they do, they understand what to do. Is there a beta blocker, or do they have to hold the person's hand? I mean, there's simple things like that people want to feel more of a connection, or after they come out of ketamine treatment. Maybe they need some counseling or some of that, because
pretty much every ketamine psychiatrist I've talked to says the same thing. Ketamine on its own doesn't really move the needle a lot. It helps, but it's ketamine combined with talk therapy that helps move the needle.
Yeah, and the way what I learned from that, I'm in no means by no means an expert in ketamine, but I've been to a couple of seminars, and the reason why it's like that when ketamine enters your brain, there is something called chandelier cells. These chandelier cells communicate without a synapse, so they can actually communicate back and forth, and they choke off some of the other cells that we have in our brain. So we're not forming new memories. So we keep replaying movies back in our head, especially people are prone to PTSD. So when ketamine enters that, the chandelier cells opens like a flower and accepts it. And now you're able to create these new memories. But when you come out, you have to have a therapist that is saying, oh, you saw a flower field and happiness. That's possible for you. Because if you don't do that, you go back to how you were before. So it makes total sense.
The future is amazing. I love talking to you, Len. It's always a blast to learn about the new stuff that's out there, the cutting edge stuff. I can't wait to see you. Hopefully in the fall, we can bump elbows or whatever is socially appropriate at that point. At a vaccinated only convention, hopefully. And talking more about pharmacogenomics. I think you're on the cutting edge, and the stuff you're doing is amazing. I can't wait to read your book. I think I placed my order on Amazon already. So
they're out in September 12th, and there's a website called Making Cannabis Personal Book, and that'll give you updates and links and all that other stuff. So
wonderful. Well, I look forward to reading it on my Kindle and spreading the word.
Thank you.
All you got to do is swab your cheek, and you get a little bit better insight.
Hey, you know what? You don't even have to swab. If you've taken your 23andMe or Ancestry or any of the other DNA tests out there, you can just use the raw data that you already have and upload it, and you'll get a report instantaneously.
I forgot about that. Yes, thank you for mentioning it. Endocanna Health, Len May, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you around the block.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.